Hey everyone, welcome to Informed Dissent, a news podcast that brings you dispatches from the gender culture war. I am Ben Appel, the gay, not queer writer Ben Appel. I'm here with my co-hosts, author and needle felter, Lisa Sellen Davis, gender clinic whistleblower and co-executive director of LGBT Courage Coalition, Jamie Reed, the brilliant but very disenchanted transsexual Corey Cohn, and the always insightful writer and researcher Eliza Mondegreen. There's been some big developments in the UK this week that we're going to talk about today. A lot of you may have heard about it. But first, I'm going to just list off some of the news headlines this week. Um, there's an interesting case. A judge has ruled against two dads who wore pink wristbands with XX with female chromosomes on their wristbands to a trans for a high school uh, sporting competition, a soccer game. And I think there was a trans identified male on the opposite team. They were banned from the school grounds, and then they sued, and then they have asked the judge to allow them back on with their wristbands while the case proceeds, and the judge has denied that request. And what state is that in here? Where is that?
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
New Hampshire.
Yeah. So that's
Is
a
what is the reason for the denial? Is it considered hate speech or
that's a
something? Is
that's a
hate speech illegal?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure why.
Didn't they say that it was like an assault on the language in the ruling and why the school was allowed to
Oh,
ban
here we
them?
go. Yeah, it says in denying their, this is from ABC News. It says in denying their motion Monday, U.S. District Court Judge Stephen McAuliffe said the parents, quote, narrow, plausibly inoffensive, end quote, intentions weren't as important as the wider context, and that adults attending a high school athletic event do not enjoy a First Amendment protected right to convey messages that demean, harass, or harm students. So XX bans demean, harass, and harm students. That's interesting.
I will admit, when I first read this, my first inclination was to book an appointment at my local tattoo parlor to get pink wristbands tattooed on my wrists that had XXs on them.
That would have been the decision right there.
Thought a little bit better of it.
That would have been a choice.
I'm gonna get a pink suit tattooed on my whole body to
And then
wear
big
with
X
the
right
Democrats.
here. I'll do some big X's on my chest. How about that?
I
All
mean,
right.
the idea that putting the symbols for chromosomes on your body is automatically hateful and offensive is such an incredible stretch and frightening.
Yeah. Well, let's see what else. The Trump administration is seeking to limit, this is from Axios, to limit the coverage of gender affirming care for adults and minors in the Affordable Care Act, marketplace health insurance plans beginning next year. If finalized, the rule would not ban marketplace plans from covering gender affirming care services, but it could raise out of pocket costs for patients. And then it also says it could add administrative burdens for insurance companies and inject confusion into state operations. So say health policy experts. This is from
No.
ABC. And Lisa, you alerted us to this. Planned Parenthood, Arizona, has resumed gender affirming care after a brief pause. I didn't even know they paused it in Arizona. In ABC 15, first learned of the pause on Friday after a viewer who identifies as transgender got in touch with us saying their appointment for gender affirming care had been canceled. And they reached out to Planned Parenthood Arizona, and Planned Parenthood issued a statement. Quoting from that statement, after a brief pause, we are pleased to announce the continuation of our gender affirming care services. This pause occurred out of an abundance of caution after threats to the Medicaid services in our state. ABC also reports that and a lot of folks are reporting this, but this is where I gather this info. The Trump administration or the Trump DOJ, Department of Justice is now suing Maine. So in that ongoing saga, the lawsuit is alleging that Maine's policy violates Title IX. And so that is happening. And then I think Pam Bondi, I believe, Attorney General, has come out saying that Minnesota is on notice, I believe, for violating Title IX in this regard, and I think California as well. So I think what they're reporting is that this is going to be likely the first of a number of lawsuits that the DOJ pursues against states for not abiding by their directives. And then what else any other big news? I have been scrounging to gather these. Let's see.
I just find it interesting that Trump and his buddies are ignoring all these rulings by judges and then pursuing other people for ignoring executive orders, and people on the left are decrying the censorship of Trump for forcing people to remove their pronouns from their bios, and then ousting these dads from a sporting event for their XX wristbands. And I guess the name of the reality show is Americans Behaving Badly, but it's not that interesting a show. And the question is, are we making progress by handling it this way?
That's a really good question. And it's well put, and it's interesting that you say that. I was actually thinking, as I was compiling this newsletter this morning and all of these, I was thinking that a lot, because I'm looking at, I know Corey too likes to see like where things are going, this broader picture. And I'm looking at where things are going, and I see that like World Pride, for example, is recommending that trans people from around the country not attend DC's Pride Parade because it can be unsafe for them, perhaps, or it's considering recommending not attending, and people are upset about that. And I imagine, like, if there are continued pride parades, what are they going to be like in the future? If like there continues to be this huge rift, what is gay and trans and all of this, what was considered a community or population, what are we going to look like in these spaces? And how are we going to get along? How are we going to coincide, and coexist?
I did not know that about DC Pride. We just put out on the Substack this morning just kind of a basic news article about all of the prides that have been losing shit tons of corporate money. Seattle Pride lost, I think, 300,000. St. Louis Pride, Anheuser-Busch pulled out. That's a big deal in St. Louis when Anheuser-Busch pulls out, because in our city, if it rains, it smells like hops, like through the whole city, because we have a giant Anheuser-Busch plant right in the middle of the city. So they're losing funding too, like hemorrhaging corporate funding.
Oh no.
Maybe it'll go back to just being what it used to be.
I don't think it will. I don't know. I think we're past the point of no return. I think we're in such a new era. And Lisa bringing up, the Trump administration ignoring, Supreme Court rulings and then demanding that other states abide by their executive orders. It's really interesting and disturbing. But
can I say something about the pride that I think is on continuing what Jamie said, is that we reached a very strange point when I would go to the bank and the ATM was celebrating pride on its own, right? Like, it was never intended to be a corporate event. And like, would you make a butt plug with your $20 bill?
I would only go along with ATM celebrating pride if they gave extra money To those of us who were truly gay, then the ATM just gave you an extra $100.
Yeah,
Any money.
I did use one of those machines, Lisa, and I was frustrated when all of my money was dispensed as $3 bills with Marsha P. Johnson as the person on them.
Yeah, that's funny. The rainbow cash didn't go as far as I
Yeah.
no, I mean, the fact that those corporations were only doing that because they were felt compelled to for some reason. They obviously didn't care, and it would be better. Okay, wait, this goes back to this much bigger question about what happens when you bring things from the margins to the center. And nobody wants to go back to the margins, but that was a celebration of, that was a way to get visibility when you didn't have it or when you felt you were being shamed, but it maybe wasn't appropriate for Pride to be a family event and having bringing your toddler to kink things. I don't know. That's the big.
Ooh, but it was okay to bring your family to Pride when it was actually just a picnic with a bunch of older lesbians who were doing a potluck. It was when the kink and I mean,
Kink's always been there.
Yeah, I agree.
You weren't at the gay man Pride
no, I
things
was,
in the West Village in the early 90s.
no, I wasn't. I've always been in the Midwestern version, which for a long time was more of a potluck with some bounce houses. Yeah, we weren't that cool here until the drag queen story time showed up, and then there was drag queen story time for the toddlers at Pride. Yeah. So do we go to the good news since there's not a ton of good news here on our side of the world?
Tell us, what is the good news, Jamie?
I think it's good news that there was a wonderful court ruling yesterday that was years in the making.
2018, right?
Yeah. The
Supreme
women of
Court
Scotland.
unanimously, right? Unanimously decided.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
Well, the Supreme Court has unanimously decided that
In
women
the
are women
in the UK,
in the UK,
part of the United Kingdom.
right? So England, Scotland, and Wales. Um, that women are women and that trans women are not women. And so when it comes to, what was it, the 2010 Equality Act, right? And the interpretation of that law and what it meant to discriminate by sex, they determined that sex means biological sex. So woman refers to biological sex. And so this is going to have obviously wide-reaching implications for policies all across the kingdom. So it is good news. It's a big deal. I mean, For Women Scotland has been fighting this for, like you said, years. It's year seven of this going on. That's the background info I have on it. What else do you got?
Just hearing directly from so many from the UK, it was so interesting I'm on this group chat with, it's almost all
Mhm.
Brits. And the initial high yesterday was they were so happy, so excited. I think everybody was celebrating and recognized this as this huge win. And then I woke up this morning and I asked Dennis Kavanaugh if I could quote him on this, and he gave me his permission. But he woke up this morning on that side of the pond. And I think that part of what settled in for him was just how close we came to disaster. He said, I should be happy, but I'm just struck by how close we came in theory to a disaster. If that court ruling went the other way yesterday, And others chimed in, I feel like I'm in a dream, nightmare state, and I can't wake up properly. A couple people correctly said, I can't believe we just spent the last 5 years of our life fighting, fighting to just have the law recognize that women are women and the amount of money that it took. And I mean, can you imagine like running an org for that many years to have to argue that position?
Yeah.
But that's the fight that we're in right now. A couple other things that came out, a couple people really said that their favorite parts, some jokes all around. It was a bad day for people sexually attracted to government issued certificates. Um, a lot of gays and lesbians really truly felt that this was recognition of what homosexuality actually is, to be attracted to the same sex. Um, and then the New York Times took all of this good news and blew it all into pieces and made it all seem really shitty here in the United States.
What did they do? How did they report on it? I didn't read it.
Lisa, did you read it? There were two articles yesterday. There was a quick piece that just had the news. And then today is a longer piece. Did anyone else read it? Or I will pull it up.
I just read yesterday's quick piece.
What did you think of yesterday's piece, including the title?
I mean, I think that the New York Times, at least for the foreseeable future, is going to find a way to make everything that's about sex about trans people. And like Helen Joyce had a bunch of interviews yesterday where the interviewer would keep steering it into the what does it mean for trans people, and she'd be like, I actually just want to talk about women for a minute.
Hmm.
What was the title of the Times piece?
Okay, let me pull up yesterday's. I tweeted it out because I was waiting for them to open up comments, which they never did, which, they make choices when they're going to open comments and when they're not. UK top court says trans women are not legally women under Equality Act. The subtitle, Britain's Supreme Court ruled that the word, quote, woman, end quote, referred to biological sex under the country's anti-discrimination law in a blow to trans rights activists.
Yeah, I don't think that's bad, right? I think that's pretty.
No, I think it's interesting that they said it's a blow to trans rights activists and not trans rights or trans. But, the court says trans women are not legally women.
And the headlines of many newspapers selling this morning across the UK say trans women are not women. My favorite thing I think that happened yesterday, other than the actual ruling, was the interview on BBC with the trans rights campaigner Heather Herbert, I think was his name, where you can just see. I think that there was some strategic cutting of there would be a side-by-side video between his face and the interviewer's face. And there were some times that her face would just disappear. And I think that it was edited because she might have had some expressions. Like when he said, just like looks like a bloke, just sounds like a bloke. And he says, if a judge told you that you're not a woman, you're a man, it wouldn't change who you are. And it's just like, but she is a woman. And like you can tell from her face when they come back to her that she's just like
right. And it's also absurd because it's like, well, you've been relying on this gender recognition for the state to tell you that you are part of the female class. It's very odd.
Yeah. And it was just kind of like the end of I hope the end of a certain kind of like media campaign by trans activists, because the guy, he kept trying to manipulate her and put her on the spot and make her look like, the meanie for saying things like, would you not let me in a women's restroom or whatever? Do you not think that I belong there? And she's like, well, it's not up to me. He just keeps trying to make it like, are you going to personally exclude me rather than, and also he kept saying that he thinks that it's like another manifestation of Trump's America, but it also won't change anything. But he also won't be able to have a job if he can't go to the bathroom. And like there was some real histrionics.
And the commenter noted that, she said,
Yeah.
okay,
Like,
so you're saying that nothing's going to change, it's not a big deal, but then you're saying we're on our way to Trump's America and that this is, going to affect your daily life, which one is it? And she said, they in their judgment they made it very clear that, discrimination against trans people will not be tolerated, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I know that they're going to be developing new policies. I think it's interesting because to hear like the equality minute and how different things are, like for like both the Labor Party to be like, yeah, this is common sense. It's good to have clarity on this. And then the Conservative Party to be like, yeah, this is what we've been hoping for. And I mean, it's just bizarre to have this consensus in the two major parties as a result of this ruling. And even the equalities minister, whatever her title is, or his title, I think her, saying, we're going to be figuring out how these policies are going to be worked out on the ground, hopefully by the summer, in terms of, but, women need their own spaces according to their sex. But I'm not going to tolerate, discrimination against trans people, in terms of hate and denying them jobs or employment. It was just so stark to what we have going on on our side of the world, or our
So
side of the pond.
I did pull up the today's New York Times piece on it. And this headline is UK court ruling on trans women is part of wider debate on sex and gender. President Trump and right-wing politicians in Europe have railed against trans rights. Britain's top court has now added its voice to the discussion. This is written by Michael Shear, who is reporting from London. What I always find interesting is I always immediately go to their contact info with the New York Times. And I love when I find that they had an X profile and they haven't used it since 2023, which in my opinion means that they're over on Blue Sky. That's my assessment. And there's no way you can even like tag this author on X because they've already shown where their alliance is. Yeah.
Who's Karen Smith. I was reading in the Times, Lisa, you had shared that article with us. Trans groups should push for third space, says equality watchdog head. The subtitle is Baroness Faulkner said Supreme Court ruling provided clarity to organizations while J.K. Rowling celebrated the decision on social media. That's from the Times London. What was interesting to this was, it says, speaking on Times Radio, Karen Smith said that only females should use a women's changing room, but was unclear about how, I guess this is the watchdog group or whatever, but was unclear about how a trans person should adapt their behavior after Wednesday's unanimous decision by the Supreme Court. This confused the hell out of me. This quote at the end, it says, and this is how not up I am, completely up I am on UK politics, but it says, quote, despite Sir Keir Starmer previously disciplining a Labour MP for defending sex-based rights for women, I'm not sure if he's talking about Rosie Duffield or I'm not sure, Smith backed the Prime Minister, saying that it was, quote, the Conservatives that allowed this situation to arise under their watch. Can anybody make sense of that for me? How it was a Labour MP could say,
I mean, the Conservatives were in power for a really long time. So technically, I guess when they were starting to sort out, or when Stonewall, for example, was going on its campaign to redefine sex and thus to redefine protections, like that was happening when the Conservatives were in power.
good point.
But there's this interesting, like, okay, shift between I want to take credit for this to I don't want the blame for this that's going on.
That was odd.
Yeah.
Matt Walsh also sort of weighed in a similar way on X about this.
What did he say?
Did anyone else see it?
No.
Like in a similar way in terms of saying that conservatives, this happened under conservatives' watch or what?
Oh, he said the opposite. He said, he wrote, okay, somebody wrote, social conservatives have to reckon somehow with the fact that it wasn't us who struck the decisive blows against gender ideology, but uncompromisingly biology first feminists. And Matt replied, this is not true at all. I've been in this movement for many years, and the vast majority of the people fighting alongside me have been conservatives. It may be a little different in the UK, but in the US, there is just no questions that conservatives led this charge. And a parent posted and said, let me tell you what I've seen as a conservative parent in this fight. In the states where this will be won, a coalition of gays, lesbians, parents, detransitioners, and conservative lobbying groups. The conservative lobbying groups have had the connection and experience, but they can't put the boots on the ground to support the bills that are aimed at ending gender ideology as a policy. The boots on the ground and a good number of the generals come directly from the gay and lesbian groups and the feminist groups. And, I don't know if Matt was correct in saying that it's different in the UK than it is here, but I don't know that it happened in their conservatives' watch in the UK, and it was the conservatives here that have been the only ones leading the charge to fight it here. I don't know. Someone else, what do you think?
It's
I just
quite
want to
like
say
a style analysis on a lot of levels.
we're being serenaded. Sorry, I had to move to where the internet works, and there's live music accompaniment. I just think that the American liberal media could only frame it as being left right in the UK, which it wasn't. Peter, sorry.
Doesn't seem to be coming through.
Yeah, we're not hearing the
hear it.
piano.
Birdie, tell Poppy to stop playing piano. Okay, anyway, but the idea that Matt Walsh has been leading this movement as if it wasn't actually started by feminists decades ago is so ridiculous. And when I look at the underground movement of liberals and parents started at the exact same time as conservatives started looking at this. Everybody pivoted in 2015 when after gay marriage was passed. The left-wing advocacy groups and the right-wing groups that had failed. So I just think I think they're all wrong. The end.
Okay, so here's a hot take on this, kind of to push back against Matt Walsh. Where were the conservatives 30 years ago when we started doing this to the gay kids? Weren't they primarily the parents who were in support of doing this?
No, it was not. It was not politicized. It was. I think.
But who were the parents who were taking those kids to the center, like to Ken Zucker in the?
I don't
Everybody.
think
It's the same. I don't think the group composition has changed much.
you don't. Who do you think it was back then taking their kids to the gender clinics when there are only 3 gender clinics in the world?
I don't want to get in trouble for saying. Because if I say it's mostly families where there's a mother with a borderline personality disorder. Somebody might take objection to that, so I won't say that.
I'm not offended by that as a mother with that. I think
Well, but back then, was anybody in opposition?
Yeah.
Okay.
when
I
I mean, Janice
was
Raymond called
not
like
But it
sex
was
role
not-
control centers.
But it was not the conservatives.
When GEMS opened in Boston in 2007, Laura Edwards Leeper was having to defend what they were doing to liberals who were concerned about how can you, after 20 hours of evaluation, which is what she tried to devote to each patient. I just know I've been reading my manuscript aloud to myself, so I just went through this part. And they were saying, like, how can you possibly know after 20 hours of seeing a patient that this who ostensibly had been suffering for a minimum of 6 months from observed from gender dysphoria, how can you still know? So and I don't think clinicians were not, I mean, it wasn't as overwhelmingly liberal among those in the helping professions. None of it was politicized, but it was not, I don't think it was, I mean, conservatives saying that. I think the field was suspicious of the whole endeavor, the field of psychology and endocrinology.
So can we unanimously say Matt Walsh was wrong on his assessment?
Yeah, look, we spent significant amounts of time last week just ripping up John Oliver. But I've got to say, apart from their political orientation, there's not a huge world of difference between Matt Walsh and John Oliver, except that as far as we're concerned, we think that on this particular issue, that Matt Walsh has the better argument. But in terms of how they politicize this and try to divide people on this, they're really not different in kind.
Okay, I'll say something controversial. I think Matt Walsh is kind of hot.
He is. That's not controversial. He's pretty
and
hot.
He looks like a Brooklyn hipster to me. I can't tell the difference.
He does look like a Brooklyn hipster, but is that hot?
Oh, he looks like a hot Brooklyn hipster. Those don't automatically go together. I'm just saying.
But
really, are you sure
more
that
attractive than he's got a lot of sex appeal?
Really high fever last week, right? Like you were like really sick. Are you okay to be out of bed? Because this is really crazy talk.
Okay, why don't we all just close our eyes and raise our hands who thinks Matt Walsh is hot.
I can do it with my eyes open. I mean, he's got some sex appeal. He's got some sex appeal, but I wouldn't,
You're married.
Well, no, that's not it at all. It's just that I'm kind of ambivalent, but yes, I can acknowledge it. I'm unafraid.
Okay, so it's just Jamie and me.
You were supposed to have your eyes closed.
Well, I had to know, we have to know who we're working with.
We can't be the only ones that don't know. The audience knows, but we none of us know.
Well, now that we've resolved that the majority believes that Matt Walsh is hot, can we maybe hot but wrong? Can we maybe pivot to the one aspect out of the UK that is still being debated that I don't know that they've gotten correct?
Yeah, are we going to talk the puberty blocker issue?
Yeah.
For the study? Okay, yeah. And also I just want to add one thing about the coverage for it's so surreal to see in this reporting. I'm quoting here from CNN, but it's like Amnesty International, which backed the Scottish government, when they're worried about trans people. Stonewall says that the Supreme Court's decision is incredibly worrying for the trans community. The Human Rights Campaign posts a picture of a map of the UK and filled in with the trans flag. And it says, "We are with you."
Where did it post that?
I saw this on Facebook.
Okay, because they've abandoned X.
Okay, I saw this on Facebook. So I mean, maybe let's just probably like Ben get over like being like surprised by any of this and flabbergasted, but and maybe you are too. And maybe I should just stop being surprised. But this the absurdity and the surrealness of all of this sometimes is a lot for me to deal with.
Well, I still do have I have a very hard time with NPR and I have a very hard time with Amnesty International.
So going back to this UK decision for just a minute, um, have like what is it going to take for the United States to have something that's more secure than just a presidential order to achieve a similar outcome where we put to bed the argument about whether gender identity claims can substitute for sex?
Well, we'd have to reopen Bostock, wouldn't we, at the Supreme Court level?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No,
So
we'd need a case to make it there. So maybe we would need someone to sue. I mean, I think a big difference, I say this as not someone who knows that much about UK politics, but we already have so many states where gender identity is the law. New York State being one of them, right? It's in the state constitution. So if there's a lawsuit that somehow gets to the Supreme Court about the definition of woman, or if somebody sues New York State because of its constitution somehow, then our court would decide. But I don't know, because of how states' rights, I don't know if that ruling would override the state constitutions, because they've been ignoring the executive orders. I mean, so the way what we have been assured as New York City school parents, public school parents, is that Trump's executive order has nothing to do with our schools. And since gender identity is part of our state constitution, don't worry, everybody. Your child will still be able to live in their subjective reality. And anyone who challenges that is still be marked a bigot and censored. So that's what I think is different. It's harder to get unstuck here because of the way it's already been institutionalized.
Since I'm not saying anything controversial this episode, I will neglect to mention or state my viewpoint that the Trump administration is in some ways like a forest fire that's just going through and burning a lot of things that shouldn't have been allowed to stand for so long anyway. A lot of dead trees and dead branches are being consumed, and to the extent that fire goes through and burns out anything that's connected with gender identity, I'm okay to put up with some smoky skies for a while.
I don't know.
Oh,
I'm more pessimistic about it. I mean, I've written about and we've talked about post-Trump after the election. There was kind of like a relief, on a lot of our parts, some of our parts anyway. And the liberals kind of just this catharsis of seeing the left and Democrats finally reckon with what they've wrought. But I'm feeling much less hopeful these days that this was a good route for this country to take. I think that it's just deepening polarization and the politicization of this, and having a figure in the White House that loves drama, and as much as he loathes and hates the press, loves press coverage and loves sparring. And then the press that we have, this polarized press. I think we're in for a long haul because of attitudes and beliefs. I mean, simply just reading The Atlantic, and The Atlantic has a interview with Sarah McBride, Congressperson Sarah McBride. And it's this whole thing, and it's so like doting, like it's so fawning and wow. I mean, the woman compares Sarah to Jackie Robinson, um,
Oh,
Who
Sarah
doesn't?
plays baseball?
the black baseball player from the what, I mean, and yeah, I lost my train of thought with that, but it's so fawning. But then I look, so I'm like, this is the Atlantic, and Sarah McBride's talking about how marginalized trans people are and so on. But then you have the Atlantic also in that same publication, dissenters that publish or think or say or write things that totally not necessarily disagree, and are on, like, completely aligned with Nancy Mace, who, loves to antagonize Sarah McBride, but at least they're like, this is kind of bizarre. And there is legitimacy to the argument that acknowledging biological sex in law and policy is common sense, and enshrining gender identity into law and policy has been, very, very consequential and bad. And that, allowing people to legally change their sex, whether it be on their IDs or certainly birth certificates, was just untenable from the beginning. Um, and so within these spaces, it's it's not just like I have a different of opinion about, fiscal concern. Well, I mean, fiscal, that's a big one too, but a different of opinion about whatever. It's like I see reality, I see the denial of reality as completely acceptable, and the enforcement of this belief system as acceptable, versus I think reality is more important, and also I'm for the separation of belief systems and state, between church and state. And that's a huge chasm.
So we have no good way out in the US, and we should just keep plugging away.
I don't know what the solution is, but I think that things like what, not to toot our own horns, but things like what we're doing is just having conversations about this from multiple perspectives is important, right? Getting out there. Jamie, I mean, the work that you do, going around and testifying and getting a diverse viewpoint from the point of view of a lesbian who worked at a gender affirming clinic, in pediatric gender medicine for so long. Corey, I mean, all of us, we have, you know, a job in this, in a way, Lisa, with what, especially with your book, Eliza. So
I just personally think the federal government, the federal route is not tenable right now, and there is no top-down solution. So, in my opinion, it has to be grassroots, and by grassroots, it has to be state by state. And I often use the word the slog, like we are like literally going through every single state. But at a certain point, we really do have the majority of states having reversed course.
I guess this is my question in terms of the chasm of how people see it. There are people who see the struggle for trans rights, quote unquote, as equivalent to the struggle for civil rights for Black Americans. Like, this is the new civil rights moment. If common sense prevails, okay, or if reality or whatever prevails, it, it's not going to be the same arc towards moral justice as the Black civil rights movement. We are going to end up in a different place. How are the people who believe that this is a civil rights issue, and that these special rights that a population demands, that they deserve those rights. When such a huge percentage of those people believe that this is the civil rights movement, what are they going to think and how are they going to interact with, and how are we all going to be able to coexist when some people see it as a continuance of a Jim Crow era and and remain in that space? I think what I'm saying is that it's so ideological and around changing minds, and it's going to be a slog, but that worries me.
Well, the most important thing I think we can do is combat both the way the New York Times portrayed the UK Supreme Court ruling and the way Matt Walsh was speaking. And we must work diligently and constantly to push people past the left-right framing, because they do not have permission to dissent until they stop seeing it as the right does one thing and the left does another.
Corey, you said NPR earlier, or no, I think Jamie, you were like, I just have a hard time with NPR and Amnesty International. I know we all do. But I was surprised in their coverage of the White House ordering the NIH to research trans regret and detransition. Reading that, they quote Abrazacci, from Segum. They quote Michael Biggs. It says that some people think that this is really important. A long quote from Segum from how do you pronounce it? Who am I talking about?
Oh, Zhenya Bergese.
Zhenya, Jesus. We are starting to see much greater numbers of young people who are seeing that they went down the wrong path for them and they're now left with irreversible changes to their body and they no longer identify as transgender, she said. Quote, they are left with these permanent effects. She adds, there are a lot of negative impacts of transition and regret is definitely one of them. It's a very important area of medicine to study. They could have just had that quote, but then they went on. Others agree. The research on detransition is very useful. It's an important area, said Michael Biggs, an associate professor of sociology at the university. This is an understudied population to collect systematic data on. And then there's even, it allows towards the end of the article something like there's a, pro-trans campaigner saying like, I don't object to evidence-based research, and including people who detransition, but they're very offended by the language in these things, researching the result of chemical and surgical mutilation. I mean, that's a consequence of Trump. That's a direct consequence of this administration.
I'd like to point out something, which I use the NPR search function. So this is casually validated, but not carefully validated. This is the first time detransition has been used in a headline on NPR, apart from coverage of the book, the novel Detransition Baby. So it's a third of the way through 2025, and this is really the first time NPR has centered this topic for an article.
Okay, so is the word now going to actually be acknowledged by a dictionary at any time soon?
No.
It's interesting too. You said that you mentioned Detransition Baby, what was it, a novel, right? The opinion piece, I don't know if you guys saw this, but this week there was an opinion article, an op-ed in the Washington Post. And it says, and the title is Detransition Maybe. And the subtitle is, have you heard about this? A Moroccan influencer announced
yes,
he was no longer transgender. What did it mean?
And that whole story was so crazy, though.
Yeah. So Malcolm
Clark from the UK had a really good thread on it.
Yeah.
Oh, if you all have not seen this Moroccan influencer, it was
right. And it was in Morocco, homosexual or same-sex acts you can be imprisoned up to 3 years. It's a fine or short-term or long-term sentences. This trans or formerly trans person was notorious for some of the actions that he had taken in the past, specifically on his Instagram, calling on his however many hundreds of thousands of followers to make secret grinder profiles and go on and bait local gay people and then out them. And so this resulted in people being terrified. It resulted, evidently, according to reports, there were suicides or at least one suicide as a result of this. And and Malcolm Clark is kind of pointing out like this just internal this visceral hate and this internalized homophobia that is very endemic on among what he says, homosexual transsexuals, similar to how there is a misogyny uh,
Mhm.
deep within what he's saying within AGP population, the trans-identified population. And so now suddenly he's detransitioned, and then I think now he's going on the religious route and so on. Um,
Malcolm, I think the last part of his tweet thread said, just as heterosexual trans identified men hate women, so their homosexual equivalents loathe gays. Both remind these deluded men that they're living a ridiculous lie. It's the existential challenge to their carefully maintained self-image that triggers hate, like Sophia Taloni's. I think Sophia was his trans identified name.
What happened to this Moroccan? Did the person then detransitioned and has lamented or
Yeah,
has
Sophia
or
has now detransitioned, um, came out publicly, has re-embraced religion, and is now both anti-gay and anti-trans.
yeah.
But
I mean, even there's another uh, issue that Malcolm Clark tweeted about. I read this article. A Moroccan actor, director of performance art, Abdelatif Naila. He was doing an interview with this trans person, and and he was saying how effeminate he was, and kind of accusing him of being gay and harassing him. And so then this gentleman went to the police because he was getting threats and he was afraid, and they arrested him
because he's gay.
because he's gay. Well, they said that yeah, they arrested him, they reprimanded him, and he was forced to pay a fine, and he was even forced to pay a fine to the police officer who said, if you were my kid, I would light you on fire."
was he allowed to have sex with men while being trans identified? I mean, wasn't
Yes.
Morocco very early in trans surgery?
Yeah, so Taloni was born in Morocco where homosexuality was illegal, and there are pictures and was allowed to be openly like with men while transitioned as a woman. So while presenting as a woman was publicly out with men without being arrested, or I think it ended up moving to Turkey eventually. But I mean the I what I felt from reading all of this story is that we should not forget that there are many places in the world where homosexuals are murdered, arrested, are not like there is still true violence against homosexuals in many places in our world, and that where trans intersects, it does often intersect in ways that directly ties right into homosexuality being criminalized. Yeah.
I mean, that's the dissonance. I mean, in terms of Western LGBTQ plus organizations, and that's the dissonance between Sarah McBride saying how marginalized he is,
Yes.
and meanwhile, and having this understanding and this broader scope is just really important. Um,
I mean,
And
you're marginalized while you're a congressperson.
well, that's what I just
I'm more
tweeted. And it's like I don't understand, how can a group of people that demand special rights, claim to be marginalized when those special rights are denied? And I said, this isn't oppression. This is
But
the
still
state,
have basic, that's the
but
thing in the
still have
US,
basic rights. That's what I'm
you
saying.
still
You still
have
have basic
basic
rights, just
rights.
not special rights. And it's like, no,
Right,
this is not oppression. This is the state saying that you're no different from the rest of us.
right. And
That
in the
we
UK, they
can't
were
force
saying,
other people to believe what you believe.
correct.
That's
And
not marginalization.
no, no.
And I think that, yeah, it would just,
I mean, that's what the UK was trying to point out in that ruling. You are not losing your basic, like you still have basic rights. Nobody's going to say you can't use a bathroom. You can't, you don't lose the right to go to work. You don't lose any of those basic human rights. You just don't get, as exactly as you said, Ben, you don't get special rights, the rights that impede on the rights of others. That's where it came down to. When there's a collision of rights, yours don't get to supersede this whole other group being women. Should we? I
I,
felt
I wonder, yeah, I actually did want to hear what you had to say about the blocker study too.
I
But if
actually
people want
I
to keep
think
going
we
on.
should I think we should hold and do it next time. I think it
Okay.
needs a much deeper conversation. And now I'm feeling like Dennis Kavanaugh is feeling now too, which was yesterday was a high, and now it's like, did they really just spend the last like 7 years having to fight for that? And also we are still walking a razor wire here in the US.
Yeah.
There's still more work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of work.
And there's always going to be some work because this cult, uh, you know what? This cult has always existed. It's been around since time immemorial. This cult is deeply part of humanity. And therefore, there's always going to be some work to resist it.
Well, this cult was institutionalized, and it was institutionalized in ways that we had not even really been thinking about as it was getting its tentacles into all of those institutions.
Yeah, your grandchildren will have to fight this again at some point in the future.
No, 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 no. No, no. I promised two very important women in the UK that we will make sure this is taken care of within our lifetimes.
I hope one of them was J.K. Rowling and that she's sending us a gift basket.
No, it wasn't JK.
Okay.
What this is like, we were talking about how, okay, prior to this kind of movement for self-ID and enshrining self-ID into law, federal and state law, or national law and overseas, there was this idea that a man gets castrated and that's valid, that there's there's a big separation in the transgender and then transsexual community. There are trans women, there are trans-identified males that are very opposed to the broader radical trans movement and what they've done. They feel like it's really derailed the non-binary, not a thing, et cetera, et cetera. And we were getting along just fine. We were going to therapy and we were getting approved for gender reassignment. And we lived as women in dresses for a year before, getting, our vaginoplasty and so on. There's this divide between, it's like comes down to, okay, well, is that what we need to go back to? I don't think that's what we need to go back to either. And so, so it's just such a course correction. It's like allowing people to legally be recognized as the opposite sex was untenable. And at the same time, telling a man, if you chop off your dick, you'll legally be a woman is also untenable.
Correct. So when I think about this in terms of WPATH, I will admit there was a long time where I thought if we could just go back to like SOC 4, then maybe this could work out and we could all go
Will
back.
you explain more about that for the
SOC 4 is exactly what Ben just said, that there was guardrails, that you had to pass a real life test, that everything had to be signed off by a therapist, that there were these limitations to it and only certain people got to progress. For a long time. Okay, if we just got back to that level of gatekeeping, this would all be okay. What that level of gatekeeping did not ever take into account was that was thinking about the individual. What I believe now is we have to view trans through the lens of societal level disruptions, and that we have the right as a society to make determinations about whether that pathway works, not asking about the individual. Does that work for the individual? Sure, there's going to be some individuals that say that works. As a society, do we want to pay the costs that that asks of us? And the downstream cost that that asks of us was medicalizing kids, women's sports, bathrooms, locker room safety, self-ID. Those were the downstream societal level consequences that we had from SOC 4 that we didn't know that it was going to get there because it was this tiny number of people. It doesn't matter how many people, it still disrupts society. It still asks society to participate in a lie.
It's a interesting question, Jamie, because you've structured it around a question, which is, do we want to pay these costs?
Yes. I think, but the part of the problem right now is that nobody's willing to actually debate the question. The question is, do we as a society want to pay those costs?
Well, we work that out through law.
Which is, yeah.
What we're gonna there are going to continue to be, okay, so let's say if we get to a point where we're like, okay, that was crazy. We can't have people change, their sex legally. And surgeries, people are really suffering. There's a lot of unsuccessful surgeries, high complication rates, and also people are getting sick, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe there are some people who are happy with the decision that they made, but there are going to continue to be people who want this, who for various reasons. We are especially concerned about, or I have been, I know a lot of us have been, people that are inherently gender nonconforming, typically same-sex attracted, that do not have room in society for their society has not created room for people that are different, and that they feel like they have to make these radical steps to be able to fit in and be accepted by society. So we're not going to get anywhere if we don't create more space for that. If that's not like, to me, I'm just proposing this maybe. At the top of our list of like what we can do is emphasizing how okay it is for people to transgress gender norms. I was watching a television show, Housewives, Real Housewives of Atlanta with my husband, and it's in Atlanta, and there's a person, and he has short hair, and he's wearing really feminine outfit and, heels or whatever. And I think he's a makeup artist or something, or an assistant to one of the women. And she refers to him as he is a man. He knows he's a man. He's referred to as a man. He is a man that likes to present effeminately. And I was looking at him. There is a freedom in being able to express yourself according to just how you feel. I know there are a lot of people who think that men who behave effeminately are performing. Okay. Um, Not for everyone, it's not a performance. It feels very natural, and it feels comfortable and good.
The same thing is said about
The same,
masculine women, that you're
exactly.
performing, that it's not, yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder, but I think too with men, I think effeminate men sometimes there's like it's like you're veering towards, if you're effeminate, you're veering towards like parodying women, or being going into drag queen territory. And there's we're not going to get into all that, but um I I we look at other cultures historically where they've had third genders, right? Like, the Fa'afafine or wherever the Hijra, but those folks in that are third gender, they don't fare very well. I mean, there's a lot of them that them in so many of these cases, if I'm correct, if my research is correct, there's a lot of prostitution,
Yes.
you know, and a lot of unwellness, of disease, and of poverty, of impoverishment, of actual severe marginalization in society,
Yes.
right? But they can be them, but they're themselves in the sense that they feel more effeminate. They go after or attract typically straight men who are curious about, you know, folks, males who are very feminine and who are feminized, and who are aroused by that. So, how do we get to a place where, like, what's our vision for getting to a place where there's space, but you don't have to be a prostitute, and you don't have to be an OnlyFans, and you don't have to be, um, that's what I think about. And I'm interviewing Pear Joseph soon, and I am excited about that because I think Pear, in a lot of ways, am I saying that right? Pear Joseph, right?
Yeah, you're saying it
Yeah,
right.
embodies something that I don't know. Pear Joseph is a gay man who is very feminine. Who, if I understand, he goes around testifying against,
Yeah,
gender-affirming care.
he'll be going with us to testify in New Hampshire.
Right. And as far as I know, his parents supported his gender nonconformity, right? And never affirmed him as a girl and just said, you're a boy and you're allowed to be this way. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So Pear seems pretty comfortable in his skin. Do you gather that?
Yes.
So I'm excited to talk to him because I don't know. I want space there.
Yeah. I think we all do. So I think maybe we wrap up this week. Next week, we really should talk about the state of research. We should talk about Jesse Single's piece. We should talk about puberty blockade study in the UK. And then maybe after that, maybe we should start thinking about carving out the vision. If we can't articulate our vision, then we're just reactives.
Oh, I think I've said it before, but I have all of gender education. I've mapped it all out and I know exactly in it how to make room for gender
Oh, I
difference.
love this. So
Yeah.
can you make it a vision board and we can
Well, no,
pitch
it's just
it
that
too?
it's one sentence and you repeat it on the first day of kindergarten and then as needed once or twice a year, or not. And it's boys and girls can look and act all different kinds of ways. And
Okay,
that's
so
it.
can I just ask also, maybe sometime in the next month or so, can we please talk about the satanic panic?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm gonna I've been reading. Lisa, you sent me down a damn
I
rabbit.
know.
That's your non-gender stuff. What is
Yeah.
it?
Okay, I'll do my non-gender stuff. The satanic panic.
I went down this rabbit hole a couple of years ago and it was really crazy. Yeah.
Oh my God.
We'll have Eliza lead the
Yes,
satanic
you-
panic episode.
And I'm gonna
I
be
wanna
writing
hear
a
all about it.
really, I'm gonna be writing a really long Substack about it too, because I do feel like there's all these overlaps about how well-intentioned people who
Oh
felt
yeah.
that. So that's
And
my non-gender plugged.
Lawrence Wright is we'll segue into my non-gender thing because Lawrence Wright wrote one of those books, right?
Yes,
He's a
he wrote
journalist.
this one.
Yeah.
Remembering Satan.
It's
Okay,
all about
yeah.
Satan.
He
Everything
wrote
is
he
about
wrote The
Satan.
Looming Tower about
Yeah.
the road to 9/11. I read that. That was very good. I did not know that that there was a documentary, that he had done a one-man show off Broadway that was then made into a documentary about this. I highly recommend it. I think I watched it on like the free streaming service Tubi, I think it
Saw
was.
the show.
You did see it, Lisa?
Yeah, I
Oh,
saw
wow.
his one-man show of his about the Middle East many years ago.
And it's like My Visit to Al Qaeda or something like that, I think is what
Yes,
it's called.
that's
My Trip to Al Qaeda.
yeah.
I
I
recommend that.
love him. I wrote him a letter after I finished Remembering Satan last week or whatever, and I said, "Hey, I had met him at a party last year, and then I talked about this the last time before I got sick, because that book was my recommendation 2 weeks ago or whatever. But anyway, I wrote him a letter and said, I'm your biggest fan, and I just want to talk to you. I'm just wondering if you have advice because of all the overlap, right down to the way there were the dissociative identity disorder clinics. And it's very similar to how there are all these pediatric gender clinics. But anyway, I have not heard back.
Maybe I'll write him too and say the same thing because I finished that book already. Okay. What about Eliza's non-gendered thing or Corey's or Lisa's?
Sorry.
Well, I think last week I mentioned that I was finishing up Open Socrates by Agnes Collard. And I'm at the very last chapter, and I learned a new word, or at least a word that I'm noticing, which is maybe different from learning. That is misology, which is the hatred of knowledge and reason and discussion. Misology. So the people who hate reason and discussion and argument are misologists. And can I read just one passage from the text, the Phaedo, which is this is the end of Socrates here, and they're arguing about whether they're an eternal soul, but they're just talking about arguments at the moment. And this passage goes, "Yes, Phaedo," he replied, "and how melancholy! If there be such a thing as truth or certainty or possibility of knowledge, that man should have lighted upon some argument or other which at first seemed true and then turned out to be false, and instead of blaming himself and his want of wit because he is annoyed, should at last be too glad to transfer the blame from himself to arguments in general, and forever afterwards should hate and revile them and lose truth and the knowledge of realities." That is my non-gender thing.
Lisa?
I love it. I wish I brought it with me, but a non-gender thing I did this week, because mostly I was still sick, was but I had to move rooms. I looked at little line drawing videos on Instagram. I mean, Instagram fed me flower line drawing videos because it knows that I like to make felt flowers. And then I got some new extra fine point drawing pens. I forget the name of this pen, but it's very nice drawing pens. And I drew flowers via Instagram. Makes you feel better about life. Oh, also I snuggled such a nice kitty, obviously not my own, last night. And I just thought there isn't really anything else than animal snuggling.
Yeah.
Eliza, what about you?
I started reading a book called Parallel Lives by Phyllis Rose, which is it's like portrait of, I think it's going to be 5 Victorian marriages, and it is really interesting.
Is that the one about women in love in the 19th century?
So I just started like the first set, so I don't know yet, but it looks like it's going to look at both parties and like, what did marriage mean? and what made people happy and what made people unhappy. And yeah, interesting book.
At the end of it, they're going to be like, it's just cats snuggling, all that, or dogs snuggling. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'll give a shout out to Megan Dom's new book, The Catastrophe Hour. I'm
good.
halfway through it. Her collection of
Most-
essays just released. And it's very good. And for writers especially, I'm always inspired to write when I read Megan. So if you're looking for some inspiration there,
Yeah.
it's really, really good. Shout out to Megan.
Shout out to Megan.
All right, thank you everyone. Any last words? Okay, big week. Congrats, UK women. Let's keep
And
trucking.
gays and
And
lesbians.
gays and lesbians, absolutely. Okay. Bye.